Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Institute of International Finance webinar on the future of insurance. My name is Mary Frances Monroe, Insurance Lead in the Regulatory Affairs Department of the IIF. Thank you for joining us today. We have an ambitious agenda for the next 3.5 hours, so I will keep my introductory remarks brief. Our focus today is on how the insurance industry has been changing rapidly over the past few years, how it is adapted to the challenges of the current environment, and how it will continue to evolve going forward. Before we begin, just a few logistical and housekeeping notes. Our discussion is on the record. We are recording this webinar and it will be posted to the IIF website shortly after the event. Members of the press are in attendance. If you have questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A prompt button at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions. We'll try to answer as many questions as time allows. Please note that attendees who are joining by phone will only be able to listen to the webinar. They will not be able to submit questions. After the webinar concludes, we would appreciate your feedback on a survey form that will be provided to you via email. So let's please first welcome our first guest this morning, Jonathan Dixon, Secretary General of the International Association of Insurance Supervisors. Jonathan will be in conversation with Tim Adams, President and Chief Executive Officer of the IIF. Let me turn it over to you, Tim.
Great. Thank you, Mary Frances, and thank you for assembling what is a truly outstanding agenda today. And thanks to all of you out there, member firms and non-member firms who are tuning in to today's agenda. And John, thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure seeing you again. It's been a while since we've been in each other's, virtual presence. So we appreciate you taking the time today from Basel. What a truly extraordinary time to be in the insurance industry. Given one of the most major catastrophic events of our lives is still unfolding in front of our eyes. So how do you see the COVID-19 pandemic? How do you see its impact on the insurance industry? And then we'll change the aperture and focus on more global generalized trends. But how do you see this crisis with respect to the industry?
No, thanks very much, Tim, and hello to everyone. And first of all, hope all your members are healthy and well. And also a very big thank you to the IIF for the focus on the insurance sector today. So yes, a very interesting time to be heading up the IIS, to be a part of all these discussions amongst insurance supervisors on the impact of COVID-19. In a sense, I would say the positive part is, I think the general view amongst our member insurance supervisors is that the insurance sector is entering this crisis from a position of strength. So, pandemics are not black swan events. They are known to the insurance sector. And there has been experience in these areas in the past. I think also a view that the industry has been bolstered by developments since the global financial crisis. So generally, position of capital strength, sophisticated risk management, I think helped by many of the regulatory reforms over the previous 10 years. But of course, the difference is, I think, the scope of the spread of the pandemic and the scope of the lockdown. So this is uncharted territory in many ways. I think what it is showing is that so far the ability of the insurance sector to respond has been good. So the developments on capital frameworks and risk management, business continuity planning has really helped to respond. But there are a lot of unknowns in the period ahead, a lot of uncertainties. On the liability side, for instance, the extent of liabilities, the issue of retroactive cover comes up a lot. but even beyond retroactive cover, uncertainty, grey areas. Also on the asset side, what does this low for long, even lower for even longer environment mean? And what about going forward with solvency risks building and the ability of the insurance sector to continue to be a stabilizer for long-term growth? So a lot of unknowns, a lot of things we're focusing on, and I think one of the key messages from the IIS discussions is really looking at the balance between the objectives of financial stability on the one hand, but also recognizing the objectives of policyholder protection with a big focus on market conduct as well.
That's a great intro and overview. You mentioned the coverage gaps, and we've seen efforts at retroactivity. How do you think about that more specifically? And what about a globalized approach versus regionalized approaches? Do we need to think about this in a much more coordinated and orchestrated fashion? If that's the case, then what can the IIF do to help the IIS think through these kind of protection gaps?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So I think you may have seen that the IIS has issued a statement last month where we cautioned against moves possibly by legislators to introduce retroactive coverage of COVID-19 related losses, particularly business interruption losses, and we flagged the risks of that, what that might mean for insurance coverage in other areas, what it might mean for financial stability risks. And we flagged that we stand ready to be involved in discussions about how do we respond to these challenges, and in particular, what it has flagged is the underlying problem is the protection gap that exists. So we have said that the IIS would like to serve as a forum, a global forum, and that in a sense really is our strength, is our convening power to bring together supervisors from around the world to discuss what is a global challenge. And there are many ideas that are coming up and possible solutions in different jurisdictions. And I hope we can play a role as a forum where we can bring together those different views and have a collective discussion among supervisors around what we think are effective solutions that could become common practices.
Well, we certainly stand ready to work with you on this very important issue. Let's turn to the broader perspective. I think the last time I saw you, we were in Abu Dhabi together, and you obviously had an agenda starting 2020. Of the items that were on your original agenda, what has been accelerated and what has stalled as a result of this pandemic?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So, yeah, Abu Dhabi seems like a long time ago. Yeah, just over 6 months, I think. But I think one of the positive things is, so we, as you know, we fairly recently approved our strategic plan in June last year, and we identified a range of what we saw as emerging and accelerating trends then. But actually, I think the reflections to date are that many of these are equally, if not more so relevant in the current environment, and we'll see some acceleration. So to name a few, technological innovation is a big theme in our new strategic plan. And of course, we've seen many accelerations of those trends around arising from remote working and the need for online services, increased automation, issues around data availability. I think some interesting questions around whether COVID-19 and the response to that is impacting consumers' willingness to share data, and where the attitudes might shift in response to that. Cyber was another big theme in our strategic plan, and of course again, the shift to remote working, online services is going to, I think, give further impetus to the need to look at a sustainable development of the cyber insurance market, for instance. As you know, another theme that we touch on in our strategic plan is around the protection gap. And we link this under our sustainability theme. We've been working for many years on sustainability, inclusion, and protection gap issues. COVID-19 is a very live example of the real imperative to make progress on that. Another interesting theme I would mention is that's coming up a lot in our discussions, which we touched on last year in our strategic plan, but again, we're seeing a real case study of it, and that's the intersection between prudential supervision and conduct supervision. So many issues which are conduct related, things like clarity of disclosure, whether there was adequate advice given, whether customers understood the coverage that they were taking out, can, as we're seeing now, have very real financial risk implications. And we need to look at how conduct risks are built into prudential frameworks. And then the last two, I think sustainability issues. I know it's a theme in today's webinar, and I would absolutely agree that this is giving further impetus to discussions on sustainability and whether we can look at a green recovery from COVID-19. So we continue to be very actively engaged on that, and I maybe come back to that topic. And then lastly, I think we'll see, but I think actually COVID-19 is also going to underscore the importance of global cooperation and the need for insurance supervisors to be able to take a global and collective view on things. So many of the reforms that we've been working on that we're still finalizing, for instance, a global insurance capital standard, which would have been very helpful to have a common language for to understand the impact on group solvency in the current period. I think has underscored the importance to carry on with those initiatives.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned the digital piece. That was, I think, the topic of my comments when I spoke at your event in Abu Dhabi. Obviously, we see technology being employed in the front end in terms of interaction with the customer, the policyholder, but also with respect to risk management. Are there challenges in keeping up with the technology and at the rapid pace of innovation? I know we talk about quantum computing and a variety of really fast-paced, extremely interesting but complex technologies. Is there a challenge of dealing with what may appear to be black box technologies in terms of supervising their application?
So frankly, yes. This is, I think this is a trend that many supervisors around the world were coming to terms with in terms of how do they keep up even before COVID-19. I think this is going to be accelerating even further. So from our side, certainly in terms of what does this mean for our strategic plan and our focus, absolutely this is, if anything, going to further emphasize the need to pivot our strategic focus to looking at the impact of technological innovation on the job that insurance supervisors have to do. I mean, there is a real challenge there in terms of supervisors having the technical know-how and the capabilities to be able to supervise in this new context. So a lot of focus at the moment is how do we promote information sharing on this? How do we promote supervisory capacity building? We've built up a fintech network, and I think it's a balance. On the one hand, I think there's an understanding that there's a necessity for this technological advancement. So the COVID and the business interruption has underscored the importance of investment in these technologies. At the same time, there's a demand that we're seeing for these technologies in terms of the customer value it can bring and what people are expecting. So as supervisors, we need to respond to that, but at the same time, being alive to some of the risks to these trends as well.
You also mentioned sustainability and the green agenda. We started the year with our meta theme. Our meta agenda was on financing sustainability, financing a sustainable future. So how do you see your role, the IIS's role, in terms of sustainability and a green agenda? It's not embraced everywhere. Obviously, Europe is ahead of other jurisdictions, but I do think there is a global movement which we'll see accelerating, maybe in response to this crisis in many ways. So what is your vision for sustainability in terms of your role in IIS?
Yeah. So I would agree absolutely with those statements. I think there is going to be an added impetus. This is an area where I'm very proud to say that I think the IIS is at the really in many ways at the forefront of discussions among standard setting bodies on the impact of climate risk and broader sustainability issues. And that's, I think, is appropriate because the insurance sector really needs to be front and center of these sustainability challenges, both in terms of, the role of the insurance sector as risk managers and risk carriers, but also as investors. So I think as a community of insurance supervisors, we see the critical role of insurers to play here. Insurers need to build on these decades of risk modeling and risk expertise to be able to advise on how to manage these sustainability risks appropriately. They know how to price this risk, and that analysis, that perspective needs to feed into broader policy discussions. And then through, on the asset side, absolutely aligning investment policies in support of sustainability issues and a green recovery. We've had a very big focus on disclosure issues from the IIS and supporting the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. And the one thing I would flag is that we are actually currently working on an application paper on the supervision of climate risk in the insurance sector, which we hope will be released later in the year. And there it's really about how do supervisors recognize that climate risk is a clear and present risk, shifting from awareness to action on these issues. And I think it's about incorporating climate risks into governance and risk management frameworks. First of all, it's about making sure they're considered in investment policies and around adequate public disclosure on these issues as well. And the last plug, if you like, is that the IIS is hosting a webinar on this application paper next week, Tuesday. So encourage participants to sign up for that if you're interested.
Fabulous. We'll make sure that we watch, and if there's anything we can do in the sustainability space to partner with you, it's one of the most vibrant work streams that we have at the IIF and will over the foreseeable future, maybe one of the most consequential issues we work on. Let me just go back in our last few minutes to raise an issue that you toggled early on, was the low for long, and what does that mean for the asset side? We have the Bank of England talking about negative interest rates. The ECB may act tomorrow in a way that will continue to suppress yields. The Federal Reserve is also talking about targeting the long end of the yield curve. It's hard to get yield anywhere. And so how do you, from a supervisory perspective, think about the asset side in which returns are almost non-existent? And if we have broad-based debt relief, that means there'll be a capital loss. How do we prepare for it? How do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, one point quickly on this is really the emphasis on a forward-looking risk assessment, and of course stress testing, scenario testing is key to that. We're linked into discussions at the FSB level on understanding some of the potential solvency risks in the coming period, and I think this is an area that's been flagged amongst our members, where we may also want to be doing some deeper dive analysis in the coming months, looking at what we can learn from stress testing exercises that are being carried out in different jurisdictions. Many of those have had maybe a bit more of a banking sector focus, but we certainly need to make sure that we can adapt those, you know, not just simply copy and paste, but adapt in a way that's appropriate to the insurance sector, to, as a first step, just get a better handle on what might be the possible scenarios, and then link that up with our discussions on appropriate supervisory responses. And that's the plan for the coming months.
Fabulous. In the last, we just have a couple of minutes left. Are there any lessons that you've learned that that you've seen over the past 12 weeks that will begin to build future responses or future approaches? I know we'll be spending the next 18 months doing look backs, lessons learned. How do we think about what transpired, what we could have done better? But are there any immediate initial reactions to the last 12 weeks?
No, I think initial reactions is, as I said previously, one positive takeaway is that the investments of the last 10 years are helping a great deal. Risk management, capital systems, business continuity planning. I think the other key takeaway is, insurance is such a focus in this current crisis with the lockdown, and how it can contribute to a proper recovery. So I think, if ever we wanted a good time to send a message about the social usefulness of insurance, now is the time to do it. So I think collectively as supervisors and industry, we need to be looking at how do we send that message first of all, but then how do we back that up with actions? And so this focus on addressing the protection gap and being able to respond better the next time round, I think needs to be a key focus, because building on public trust and continuing to grow confidence in the insurance sector at this time when insurance is really needed the most, I think is going to be one of our critical challenges.
I completely agree with you. We want to be a partner with you in that endeavor. Obviously, the criticality, the centrality of insurance is now more evident than ever. But Jonathan, thank you very much. You've been very kind to spend your afternoon with us. I want to wish you all the best. Please stay safe and healthy. And with that, I'll turn it back to Mary Frances. Thank you very much.